For decades, we've basically all operated on this deeply ingrained assumption. If a country just builds more schools, well, it automatically guarantees a prosperous, developed nation, right? But a really fascinating new paper titled Rethinking Education as the Sole Prerequisite for National Development in 21st Century Asia completely flips this idea on its head. Let's dive into this explainer and see why.
It really forces us to stop and ask, does more schooling automatically equal a richer nation? I mean, it is time to challenge that traditional belief that just spending more time sitting at a desk is the ultimate silver bullet for a country's economic success. Because, as we're going to see in the data today, in the 21st century, the reality is way more complex.
Okay, so we are all pretty familiar with classic human capital theory. It's that 20th century mindset that expanding a person's cognitive and non-cognitive skills naturally raises their productivity and earnings, right? And then that drives broader economic and social development. Basically, you get smarter, you work better, your country gets richer. It's the baseline we literally all grew up with.
In fact, there's a famous quote from the research paper that sums this up perfectly. Education builds people, and people build nations. And hey, it is a really beautiful thought. But here's the thing. In a rapidly changing global economy, this sentiment is kind of hitting a brick wall. Just having the people, well, it isn't enough anymore. That's only half the story.
Think of traditional schooling like a high-performance engine. It's powerful for sure, but that engine is completely useless without the fuel of labor market demand, and it definitely can't go anywhere without the paved road of good governance. You need the whole vehicle to actually get somewhere, not just a revving engine.
So what actually makes up the rest of that vehicle? Well, the researchers identify several what they call missing links. Let's say a nation just pumps out graduates, but they do it without labor market relevance, without robust institutional governance, high instructional quality, or actual 21st century skills, things like critical thinking and digital literacy. If those links are broken, education operates in a complete silo, and the engine just revs without moving the country forward an inch.
And actually ignoring these links completely backfires. Economists like Basu and Bhattarai point out that simply throwing government money at credentials without matching those skills to the actual market, it just results in misallocated spending. You end up with a highly educated populace fiercely competing for jobs that don't even require their degrees. It's that classic barista with a master's dilemma. It's an incredibly common yet frustratingly avoidable bottleneck for an economy.
Section 1. Asia's Development Evidence, the Reality Check. Now, what's really fascinating is watching this exact theory play out in real time across diverse Asian economies. Let's start with Indonesia. When analyzing their poverty and growth nexus, the data reveals that education definitely works. But, and this is a big but, only when it's embedded within a broader development regime. Building schools there helped reduce poverty and drive growth simply because the Indonesian government simultaneously implemented complementary economic policies to actually absorb those newly educated workers into the economy.
Jumping straight over to Malaysia, we uncover another huge piece of the puzzle. The evidence there shows education's developmental impact is amplified immensely when female labor is actively integrated into the economy. Remember our analogy? The educated workforce is the engine, but demographic and labor market integration, specifically bringing more women into the workforce, that acts as the necessary fuel to actually drive economic growth.
And over in Nepal and India, the data points to a strong causality between enrollment, teacher quality, and GDP growth. It is a really clear reminder that it's not just about pushing kids into classrooms. Even in nations with super tight fiscal space, investing specifically in the quality of teachers directly boosts economic output, as long as, of course, those educational goals strictly align with national growth objectives.
Which brings us to a really fascinating turning point in this explainer. Can a nation develop even if its overall educational attainment is just, moderate? If traditional schooling isn't the absolute gatekeeper we all thought it was, what exactly are the alternatives?
Enter alternative learning pathways. These non-formal routes are literally changing the game. We're looking at transparent e-government systems that make registering microenterprises super easy, completely bypassing traditional schooling bottlenecks and bureaucracy. We're seeing massive open online courses, or MOOCs, and stackable micro-credentials, providing the hyper-targeted skills industries actually need right now. Plus, ICT-enabled blended learning allows people to upskill without taking a 4-year university detour. Basically, these digital platforms lower the barriers to entry for new businesses and totally democratize learning.
Section 2. The resource twist. Growth without high education.
Let's see how this builds into an entirely different development model.
Countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan have achieved massive development gains using a completely different pathway, one that doesn't rely entirely on a top-tier aggregate education system to get started. Step 1. They leverage energy wealth, like oil and gas. Step 2, and this is the critical pivot, they use good governance to manage that wealth. Step 3, that transparent management allows for heavy investment in infrastructure and economic diversification. And Step 4, that finally results in broad national development.
But there is a major catch here. This alternative pathway absolutely requires that paved road of good governance we talked about earlier. Energy wealth only works if it is managed with transparent, accountable institutions. Without that, you trigger the dreaded resource curse. The wealth gets squandered, diversification fails, and the entire system falls apart, regardless of how many schools you build or how many oil wells you drill.
And this brings the paper's core thesis brilliantly together. As you can see, traditional formal education is just one pathway to human capital, and it is heavily moderated by things like governance quality, labor market alignment, and institutional integrity. But equally important are the alternative pathways, entrepreneurial ecosystems, MOOCs, and strategic resource management that lead directly to sustainable national development. Development is absolutely not a straight ladder anymore. It is a complex, interconnected web.
The authors synthesize this perfectly with this quote: "Policymakers must prioritize building coherent ecosystems that seamlessly harmonize diverse learning opportunities with industrial innovation." So, what should you really take away from all this? Whether you're looking at your own local economy or broader national policy, we have to abandon isolated educational targets. Just counting kids in classrooms and expecting an automatic economic boom? That is an outdated strategy. We need holistic reform that connects learning directly to the real world. So, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to evaluate your own nation's true strategy. Is your country just building schools, or is it building an ecosystem? Because if it's just the former, well, you've got a high-performance engine sitting in the driveway with absolutely no fuel and nowhere to go. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.